Publicly shamed, framed for priceless art theft, Clara faced ruin and deadly threats to her sick brother. Then a silent, powerful bidder for the stolen dagger appeared, watching her despair. He didn't offer salvation. He simply declared her his property. She thought she was trapped, but he was the city's ruthless mafia boss, now obsessed with protecting what was his. Was she finally safe, or merely traded one prison for a far more dangerous claim? The scent of linseed oil and turpentine was Clara Rodriguez's most constant companion, a familiar balm against the gnawing chill that resided deep within her bones. It clung to her, a phantom embrace, as she meticulously brushed a whisper of pigment onto the cracked surface of a 17th-century Flemish portrait. The old master's eyes, once obscured by centuries of grime and neglect, began to emerge, piercing and vibrant, as if waking from a long, troubled sleep. This small studio, tucked away in the labyrinthine depths of Gallery Noir, was her sanctuary, a silent haven where the world outside, with its crushing weight of debt and despair, momentarily faded. Here, surrounded by the ghosts of forgotten beauty, Clara could almost forget the relentless drumbeat of her own suffering. Her fingers, slender and stained with a rainbow of dried paints, moved with an practiced elegance that belied her 26 years. Each stroke was a prayer, a silent testament to the passion that still burned, a fragile ember, within her. She loved this work more than she loved anything else, pouring her very soul into resurrecting the past, coaxing forgotten brilliance back into the light. Yet, the irony was a bitter taste on her tongue. She who could restore priceless masterpieces to their former glory felt utterly incapable of mending the fractured pieces of her own life. The soft hum of the gallery's ancient ventilation system was the only sound breaking the silence, punctuated occasionally by the distant, muffled clatter of a cleaning cart or the murmur of hushed voices from the floors above. It was late, past closing. The opulence of Gallery Noir, with its soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and hushed reverence for art, was now cloaked in a solitary grandeur. During the day, it was a gilded cage, teeming with wealth and pretension. At night, it felt like a tomb, its beauty a cold, indifferent mockery of her struggles. Clara sighed, a faint puff of air that barely disturbed the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from her work lamp. Her gaze drifted from the painting to the worn photograph taped beside her workbench, a smiling boy with bright, innocent eyes, thinner than he should be, hooked up to a tangle of tubes in a hospital bed. Leo? Her little brother. His name was a constant ache in her chest, a silent plea that echoed in every heartbeat. The medical bills, thick stacks of pristine white paper, lay like tombstones on her kitchen table back in her tiny, sparsely furnished apartment. Every syringe, every medication, every agonizing hour of his fragile existence had a price tag, a devastating figure that loomed over Clara like a vengeful god. Her contract with Mr. Thorne, the insidious proprietor of Gallery Noir, was a suffocating tether. He paid her just enough to keep her afloat, to prevent outright starvation, but never enough to truly escape. It was a calculated cruelty, a masterstroke of manipulation that ensured her unwavering loyalty. Thorne, with his slick, oiled hair, his tailor-made suits that whispered of old money and new secrets, was a predator cloaked in cultured charm. His smile never quite reached his eyes, which held a glint of something cold and utterly ruthless. Just last week, he had summoned her to his office, a cavernous space overlooking the city, where ancient tapestries hung heavy on the walls and the scent of expensive cigars perpetually lingered. Clara had stood before his imposing mahogany desk, her hands clasped tightly, feeling like a small, insignificant insect under his magnifying gaze. "Clara, my dear," Thorne had purred, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "You truly are a marvel. This restoration of the Medici Madonna is simply exquisite." He gestured vaguely at a projected image on the wall, a digital rendering of her painstaking work. A true artist. A pity such talent is so undervalued in this modern age. Clara had offered a polite, practiced smile, her stomach clenching. She knew what was coming. It always did. However, Thorne continued, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood. "The gallery's overheads, as you can imagine, are substantial. And with the market being temperamental, one must make certain adjustments. He paused, letting the unspoken hang in the air, a silent threat. Clara's breath hitched. She knew what adjustment meant. Lower pay, longer hours, even less security. Of course, Mr. Thorne, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I understand completely. His smile widened, a predatory flash of white teeth. Excellent. And speaking of understanding, your brother. Leo, isn't it? Such a brave little fellow. One hopes his condition doesn't worsen. Medical expenses can be rather debilitating, can't they? The words, delivered with feigned sympathy, were a direct hit. Clara felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was always about Leo. Thorne knew her Achilles heel, and he exploited it with chilling precision. I am doing everything I can, sir. Indeed. And that's precisely why your dedication here is so crucial. No distractions. We wouldn't want any unfortunate incidents to affect your ability to provide for your family, would we? He picked up a polished jade letter opener, turning it over and over in his manicured fingers, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a subtle gesture, a quiet display of power, yet it resonated with an undeniable menace. Clara had swallowed, her throat dry, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was trapped, a gilded bird in a very expensive cage, with invisible chains binding her to Thorne's will. Every desperate hope for a brighter future, for her own little studio, for Leo's complete recovery, felt like a cruel fantasy. Despair with a heavy cloak, muffling her spirit, stifling her dreams. Now, as the highly anticipated Serpent's Kiss auction loomed, a new kind of tension hung in the air. The legendary sapphire-encrusted dagger, rumored to have graced the hands of ancient queens and shadowy assassins, was the crown jewel of the upcoming event. Clara had spent weeks preparing it, cleaning every intricate detail, marveling at the vibrant blue of the sapphires, their icy fire a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded her. It was a magnificent, dangerous thing, steeped in history and whispered legends. Thorne was obsessed with the dagger, not for its artistic merit, but for the astronomical sum it was expected to fetch. And the buyer, the elusive Shadow Lord Dante Volkov, was a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in certain circles. A man of immense, almost illicit wealth, with a reputation as sharp and deadly as the dagger itself. Clara felt a knot of foreboding tighten in her stomach. She had meticulously checked every security protocol, every latch and lock of the reinforced display case that now housed the Serpent's Kiss in the main hall. Yet, despite her diligence, Thorne's unsettling gaze followed her, his questions about the dagger's security unnervingly persistent. She was merely an employee, a pawn, and a growing sense of dread told her that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong. The air itself felt heavy, pregnant with an unspoken threat, a gathering storm. Tomorrow night, the auction. Her future, Leo's future, hung by a thread, and she had no idea the loom of fate was about to weave a tapestry far darker, far more dangerous than anything she could possibly imagine. The air in the main hall of Gallery Noir vibrated with an electric tension, thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, aged with polish, and the faint metallic tang of anticipation. Crystal chandeliers, suspended like glittering frozen rain, cast pools of warm, golden light across the gathered elite, collectors with hawkish eyes, critics with pursed lips, and a scattering of socialites draped in silks and diamonds. They sat in hushed reverence, their gazes fixed on the illuminated pedestal where the Serpent's Kiss rested, encased in a reinforced glass display. Clara, stationed discreetly near the back, her heart a frantic hummingbird against her ribs, felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. Not from the chill of the air conditioning, but from the immense pressure of the moment, a suffocating weight of expectation and hidden dangers. Her role was merely to oversee, to be a silent guardian of the masterpiece she had painstakingly restored. Yet, a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Mr. Thorne, perched at the auctioneer's podium with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, kept glancing at her, a possessive glint in his eyes that made her skin crawl. He had been unusually insistent about her being present, a deviation from her usual behind-the-scenes duties. It felt less like an honor and more like an exhibition. The bidding began, a slow, elegant dance of raised paddles and hushed increments, but it swiftly escalated into a furious ballet of millions. Each number called out by the auctioneer felt like a hammer blow to Clara's already strained nerves. She watched the glowing display, her eyes tracing the dagger's intricate hilt, the cold fire of the sapphires. This object, imbued with so much history and myth, was about to find a new master. Then he entered. The murmurs in the opulent hall didn't cease. They shifted. A subtle, almost imperceptible ripple of unease, like a stone dropped into still water. Heads turned, not overtly, but with a clandestine curiosity. Dante Volkov, the Shadow Lord. Clara had only heard whispers, rumors spun from shadows and fear. A man who collected art like other men collected breath, a figure of immense power whose empire was built on foundations no one dared to truly examine. He moved with an almost supernatural grace, a silent force cutting through the chattering crowd. Tall, impossibly broad-shouldered beneath a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, he seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His dark hair was swept back from a chiseled face that was both austere and undeniably handsome, a face that belonged on ancient Roman coins rather than in a modern auction house. His eyes, the color of obsidian, were sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. They swept over the room, an almost predatory assessment, lingering on the dagger for a fraction of a second before moving on. Clara felt them, a cold current, brush over her, and a gasp caught in her throat she hadn't even realized she was holding. There was an aura about him, a dangerous magnetism that promised both untold wealth and silent, brutal power. He wasn't merely wealthy, he was authority personified. He took a seat in the front row, utterly devoid of fanfare, yet his presence instantly dwarfed everyone else in the room. The bidding, which had reached a fever pitch, seemed to falter for a moment, the bidders suddenly aware that a new, unassailable player had entered the game. Thorn, for all his bluster, offered a tight, deferential nod in Volkov's direction. The auctioneer, regaining his composure, announced the current bid, a staggering amount that made Clara's head spin. Then, from Dante Volkov, a single, deep voice, a resonant rumble that echoed in the vast hall, utterly devoid of emotion. 50 million. A collective gasp. Silence. No one dared to counter. The dagger was his. Just as Thorn was about to strike the gavel, a sudden blinding flash of light consumed the hall, followed by an immediate, terrifying darkness. A wave of panicked gasps and confused shouts erupted. Women shrieked, men barked orders into phones, the clatter of dropped programs, and the scraping of chairs filled the void. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. No, not now. Her mind raced, a terrifying kaleidoscope of every security protocol, every precaution she had taken. She fumbled for her phone, its tiny flashlight beam a pathetic spear against the oppressive black. She could hear the frantic shuffling, the jostling. Then a sickening crack. The sound of shattering glass, sharp and violent, sliced through the pandemonium. It was unmistakably the display case. A cold, visceral fear gripped Clara, twisting her insides. The dagger. Just as swiftly as it had come, the darkness vanished. The chandeliers flickered back to life, bathing the scene in a harsh, revealing glare. The main hall, seconds ago a picture of refined elegance, was now a tableau of chaos. Security guards, looking bewildered, scrambled for positions. The guests, disheveled and shaken, murmured nervously. And on the pedestal where the serpent's kiss had rested only moments before, there was nothing but a gaping hole in the shattered glass, shards sparkling like malevolent diamonds on the velvet cushion. The dagger was gone. Clara, frozen in place, stared at the empty pedestal, a scream building in her chest. It's gone. How? Then Thorn's voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the stunned silence. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Clara. There she is. Clara Rodriguez. She was the last one with access. She must have orchestrated this. A common thief preying on our generosity. His words hit her like a physical blow. The accusation, so public, so immediate, stole the breath from her lungs. Shame, hot and sickening, rushed through her veins, mixing with a paralyzing terror. Faces turned, eyes narrowed, whispers erupted, louder now, judgmental and cruel. Thief, liar, betrayer. The labels seared themselves into her skin. No. Clara gasped, her voice raw, barely audible above the rising clamor. Mr. Thorne, you know that's not true. I followed every protocol. I would never. But Thorne cut her off, his face contorted in a mask of righteous fury. Silence. Don't you dare try to deny it. You were desperate, weren't you? Burdened by your family's debts. What better way to secure your future than to steal a fortune? The humiliation was absolute, a public flaying. Her meticulously constructed life, her reputation, her very dignity, crumbled into dust around her. The faces of the elite, once merely curious, now held undisguised disgust. She felt utterly exposed, naked under their condemning stares. Amidst the rising din, one figure remained unnervingly still. Dante Volkov. He hadn't moved from his seat, but his obsidian eyes, now narrowed, were fixed on Clara. He observed everything. Thorne's theatrical outrage, the guard's frantic movements, the guest's judgmental glares, and Clara's utter, devastating despair. There was no panic in him, only a quiet, dangerous intensity. He was not looking for a thief. He was assessing a situation, calculating the odds, weighing the players. Then, with a deliberate slowness that commanded immediate attention, he rose. Every eye in the room, drawn by the sheer force of his presence, shifted towards him. He walked towards the shattered display case, his footsteps echoing ominously on the marble. He didn't touch the glass, merely surveyed the damage, his expression unreadable. He turned, his gaze sweeping over Thorne, then over the bewildered crowd, finally settling, with an almost chilling inevitability, back on Clara. The intensity of that stare pierced her, stripping away her last vestiges of composure. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her every flaw and fear laid bare. His voice, a low, powerful rumble that seemed to silence the entire hall, cut through the tension like a razor. The auction is adjourned. He paused, his gaze hardening on Thorne, who visibly flinched. The dagger was to be mine, and anything or anyone involved in its fate. His eyes, dark and predatory, locked onto Clara, pulling her into their depths, claiming her. Is now mine to claim. The words were not a question. They were a statement, a declaration. Clara felt a new kind of terror, cold and absolute, replace her humiliation. She was no longer just a framed employee. She was a piece on his chessboard, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, claimed by a man whose power was as terrifying as it was undeniable. Her fate, she realized with a sickening jolt, had just been irrevocably sealed by the Shadow Lord. The cacophony of voices, once a dull roar, now coalesced into a sharp, piercing drone around Clara. The flashing blue and red of police lights pulsed through the grand archways of Gallery Noir, painting the opulent scene with an ugly, urgent glow. Detectives, stern-faced and methodical, moved through the wreckage of the auction hall, their questions like tiny, relentless drills boring into Clara's already frayed nerves. Thorne, a master of theatrical indignation, had already given his statement, painting Clara as a calculating thief driven by desperation. His accusations, laced with venom and half-truths, hung heavy in the air, solidifying into an inescapable judgment. Clara stood, trembling, a detective's notepad poised expectantly before her. Miss Rodriguez, do you deny the accusations laid against you by Mr. Thorne? His voice, though calm, felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Yes, she whispered, her voice a reedy, pathetic sound. I deny them. I didn't steal anything. I restored it. I would never. You were the last one with access, Miss Rodriguez. You admit to that. Yes, but a sharp, almost imperceptible elbow nudged the detective's arm. One of Dante Volkov's men, a mountain of a man with eyes as cold and flat as slate, stepped forward. He wasn't a lawyer, not officially, but his presence exuded an authority that made the police hesitate. My client advises Miss Rodriguez to refrain from further comment until legal counsel is present. Your client. The detective frowned, his gaze flickering from the imposing man to Clara, then to the distant figure of Dante Volkov, who stood by the shattered display, observing with an unnerving stillness. The mountain of a man offered no explanation, just a silent, unyielding stare. And just like that, the interrogation ceased. Clara was whisked away, not in handcuffs, but enveloped in a new kind of confinement. She was guided out of the gallery's main entrance, past the gawking eyes of lingering socialites and flashing camera bulbs. The crisp night air, usually a welcome reprieve, now felt like an icy shroud. She was ushered into the back seat of a sleek, black sedan, its tinted windows shielding her from the prying world, yet trapping her within. Her mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel of panic. What was happening? Why was Volkov's man here? What did his client mean? The questions swirled, thick and suffocating, each one heavier than the last. Fear for herself was overwhelming, but fear for Leo was a consuming fire. Thorne's veiled threats about her brother's fragile health echoed in her ears. He was capable of anything. And she, a lowly art restorer drowned in debt, was utterly defenseless. The thought was a physical blow, bending her double with its weight. The car moved silently through the city streets, a blur of neon lights and anonymous buildings. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass, desperate for a moment of clarity, a sliver of hope. But there was only the looming shadow of Dante Volkov, whose words, "is now mine to claim," resonated with a terrifying, absolute finality. The sedan pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates, flanked by ancient stone walls that seemed to absorb the streetlights. They swung open silently, revealing a winding driveway that led to a mansion bathed in subtle, atmospheric lighting. It was less a house and more a fortress, a bastion of dark luxury nestled amidst manicured grounds. The air here was different, heavier, thick with unspoken power. She was led through grand, silent halls where priceless artworks adorned the walls, each one a testament to the owner's discerning eye and limitless wealth. It was art, but viewed through a different lens, not for its beauty alone, but as symbols of acquisition, of dominance. Clara felt a strange, unsettling familiarity with the pieces, an almost desperate urge to examine them, to find solace in their silent stories, but a pervasive sense of being watched held her captive. She was shown into a spacious, dimly lit study. A roaring fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with leather-bound books. The rich scent of old paper, polished wood, and something distinctly masculine, a hint of expensive cologne, perhaps, filled the air. Dante Volkov stood by the window, his back to her, gazing out into the dark night. He seemed to embody the shadows themselves, a formidable silhouette against the distant glow of the city. He turned slowly, his eyes dark as polished onyx, meeting hers. They held no warmth, no sympathy, only a sharp, assessing intelligence that seemed to strip her bare. Clara instinctively straightened her spine, a flicker of defiance igniting within her, despite the trembling in her hands. Clara Rodriguez, his voice was a low, resonant baritone, a sound that vibrated deep within her chest. Or should I say, the scapegoat? Clara flinched. "I am not a scapegoat. I am innocent." A corner of his lip tilted upward, a chilling approximation of a smile. "Innocence is a luxury few can afford, Miss Rodriguez, especially when pitted against a man like Thorne, whose pockets are deeper than your conscience, and whose influence stretches further than you can possibly imagine." He gestured to the plush leather armchair opposite his desk. "Sit." Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second, then sank into the chair, its softness a stark contrast to the rigid tension in her body. "Let's be direct," Dante began, settling into his own chair, leaning back with a deceptive casualness that spoke of absolute control. The dagger was to be mine. Its disappearance and your subsequent framing inconvenienced me severely. Clara wanted to argue, to plead her case, but the words felt stuck in her throat. His gaze was too intense, too unyielding. Thorn is a parasite. He has been running a quiet operation, laundering money through stolen artifacts and legitimate sales for years. The dagger was his latest grand scheme. Fake its theft, claim the insurance, and sell it on the black market at an even higher price. You, Miss Rodriguez, were merely a convenient fall guy. A desperate, talented, easily disposable individual. His bluntness was like a cold splash of water, shocking her with its brutal truth. It made a horrifying kind of sense. The way Thorn had watched her, his subtle threats, his insistence on her presence. But why me? She whispered, her voice raw. Because you were vulnerable. And because you were the most credible choice for his audience. No one would question the narrative of a struggling assistant succumbing to temptation. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. I, however, question everything. Clara swallowed, her heart hammering against her ribs. So you believe me? Belief is irrelevant. I deal in facts and leverage. And the fact is, you are caught in a legal net woven by a man who will not hesitate to ruin you and anyone you care about to protect his interests. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, taking on a dangerously persuasive tone. Your brother, Lee, is it not? A delicate boy, suffering from a rare cardiac condition. Medical bills, substantial and mounting. Thorn has made discreet inquiries. He knows your vulnerabilities. He will use them. The air left Clara's lungs in a strangled gasp. He knows. He knows about Leo. The realization was a devastating blow, far more terrifying than any accusation against herself. Her fiercely guarded secret, her deepest pain, was now a weapon in Thorn's hands. And in Dante Volkov's. What do you want? Clara managed, her voice trembling, stripped of all pride. A deal, Dante replied, his eyes piercing. I will ensure Thorn's narrative is dismantled. I will provide irrefutable evidence of his fraud and your innocence. I will guarantee Leo receives the best medical care money can buy, anywhere in the world, for as long as he needs it. Your family will be safe, secure, untouched by Thorn's machinations or anyone else's. Clara stared at him, hope and terror warring within her. It was everything she desperately needed, everything she had fought for. It was salvation. But nothing came free from a man like Dante Volkov. And in return, she asked, the words barely a breath. In return, he stated, his voice resonating with an unyielding finality, you come to work for me. You live here, under my protection, in my world. You will restore the art I collect, and perhaps more importantly, you will become mine. The word hung in the air, possessive and absolute. Mine. It wasn't about love or even desire, not in the romantic sense. It was about ownership, about a power move. He wasn't just offering her a way out, he was offering her a new cage, albeit one gilded with unimaginable luxury. Clara's stomach churned. Her independence, her fragile sense of self, rebelled. She was an artist, a free spirit, not a possession. But then, Leo's pale face flashed in her mind, the faint pulse of the monitor beside his hospital bed, the crushing weight of overdue bills. What was her freedom worth if her brother suffered? What was her pride worth if it meant losing him? The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an ultimatum, wrapped in a shimmering cloak of salvation. Ah! Clara swallowed past the lump in her throat, the words tasting like ash. I accept. A flicker of something. Satisfaction? Triumph crossed Dante's eyes, swiftly masked. Good. Then it is settled. You will inform your family that you have accepted a lucrative position requiring you to reside on site. Any contact will be monitored for their safety. You are no longer Clara Rodriguez, struggling artist. You are now under my domain. You belong to me, Clara. Remember that. The last words were a whisper, yet they echoed with the force of a thunderclap. Clara felt the invisible chains snap into place, binding her not to debt, but to a powerful, dangerous man. She was safe, yes, but she was also utterly, irrevocably trapped, a jewel in the Shadow Lord's formidable collection, her future an unknown labyrinth of dark desires and silent commands. She wondered what price her soul would pay for Leo's salvation. The transition from her cramped, paint-splattered apartment to the lavish confines of Dante Volkov's estate was less an upgrade and more a dizzying descent into a gilded cage. Clara's new studio, a sun-drenched sanctuary on the mansion's upper floor, was a masterpiece in itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of manicured gardens and a distant cityscape, a stark contrast to the grimy brick wall she used to face. The air, crisp and filtered, smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cleaning products, rather than the urban exhaust that had once permeated her old workspace. Every tool, every pigment, every brush she could ever desire was meticulously arranged, new and pristine, gleaming under the perfectly calibrated art lights. She ran a hesitant hand over the smooth, cool surface of a new oak easel, its craftsmanship flawless. It was as she now occupied within it. She found herself, much to her internal chagrin, growing curious. What drove such a man? What secrets lay beneath that impenetrable facade? He wasn't just a brute. He was cultured, intelligent, a dream, the kind she had only dared to whisper into the dark hours of sleepless nights. Yet a bitter taste lingered on her tongue. This perfection, this unimaginable luxury, was a direct consequence of her shattered life, her forced surrender. She connoisseur of beauty and power. This internal conflict, the push-and-pull between fear and a budding, unwelcome fascination, was a torment. She hated him for taking her freedom, but she couldn't deny the perverse sense of security. He was here not by choice, but by obligation, a prize claimed by a powerful man. Gratitude warred fiercely with a suffocating resentment, tangling in her chest like knotted threads. Her days unfolded with a disquieting predictability provided. She despised being owned, yet the thought of facing Thorne's insidious threats alone now filled her with true terror. One evening, as Clara sketched quietly in her studio, a soft melody drifted from the main living area, a classical. The household staff, a retinue of silent, efficient figures, moved through the mansion like ghosts, their presence almost imperceptible. A fresh pot of her favorite jasmine tea appeared each morning in her studio, alongside a small plate of artisan peace, somber and achingly beautiful. It was unexpected. She had imagined Dante Volkov listening to fierce, modern music, not the melancholic strains of a cello. She found herself drawn to the sound, creeping silently down the hallway. He was there, in the living room, standing by the panoramic window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze fixed on the cityscape. The music enveloped him, making him seem less formidable, almost vulnerable. The pastries, without her ever having to ask. Lunch, a selection of gourmet dishes, was served in her studio at precisely noon. They were attentive, polite, almost unsettlingly so, their eyes betraying nothing. Yet Clara felt their glances was a fleeting glimpse, a crack in his armor, and ignited a dangerous spark of intrigue within Clara. As the weeks turned into a month, Clara found herself studying him, not just as her captor, but as a complex, a constant gentle pressure that reminded her she was always under observation. She was a valuable acquisition, and valuable acquisitions were carefully monitored. One crisp afternoon, as she worked on a particularly challenging Renaissance fresco fragment, a gentle knock, dangerous man. His eyes, though dark, sometimes held a flicker of something ancient, a weariness that hinted at burdens she couldn't fathom. He would often appear silently in her studio, watching her work for minutes on end. His presence sounded at her studio door. Marcus, Dante's hulking but soft-spoken aide, entered, holding a tablet. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his deep voice unexpectedly kind. "Mr. Volkov wished for you to have a heavy cloak that both stifled and intrigued her." "What are you thinking?" he asked one afternoon, his voice soft, almost a whisper, startling her. She had been staring at an unfinished canvas, lost in thought. This update on Leo? Clara's heart leaped, a frantic bird against her ribs. She snatched the tablet, her fingers trembling. The screen displayed a detailed medical report, complete with a smiling photograph of Leo. His cheeks looking. Clara hesitated, her heart quickening. About how sometimes the most beautiful things are born from the greatest pain. His gaze intensified, a dark, searching pool. Indeed, he murmured, his voice laced with an unspoken meaning. Fuller, his eyes brighter. He was at a specialized facility in Switzerland, the report stated, receiving cutting-edge treatment, his progress remarkable. Dr. Elias Vance, the renowned pediatric cardiologist, personally oversaw his case. All expenses, of course. Pain is a powerful sculptor, Miss Rodriguez. It shapes us, defines us. Clara felt a tremor of something, a connection, however fleeting, however dangerous, passed between them. He understood. He saw her. And in that terrifying were settled. A wave of overwhelming relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees weak. Tears, hot and stinging, blurred her vision. Leo was safe. He was getting better. This, she knew, was Dante's doing. Exhilarating moment. She realized that despite herself, despite the chains, she was starting to see a glimpse of the man behind the Shadow Lord. A man whose darkness was profound, but perhaps not entirely devoid of a twisted, dangerous beauty. And she was standing dangerously close to the edge of his abyss, his silent fulfillment of a terrifying promise. Yet, alongside the profound gratitude, a prickle of unease arose. She had tried to call Leo herself, but her calls had been filtered, routed through Marcus, scheduled at specific times. She was allowed brief, supervised video chats, but never direct, unmonitored contact. It was another subtle reminder of her new reality. Her family's well-being was inextricably linked to Dante, and he controlled every facet of that connection. He wasn't just protecting Leo, he was holding him in a way as collateral. Dante himself was an enigma. He rarely sought her out, yet his presence was a constant, heavy weight in the sprawling mansion. She would catch glimpses of him in the vast, echoing library, lost in a book or in the gallery wing, his piercing gaze fixed on a painting she had just completed. He never offered praise, rarely even a comment, yet his silent, prolonged contemplation of her work felt like a deeper form of acknowledgement. One evening, after dinner, she found herself lingering in the main drawing room, drawn by the melancholic strains of a cello piece playing softly from hidden speakers. She hadn't realized he was there until she turned and found him standing by a large window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, gazing out at the city lights. The sheer power he exuded was almost palpable, a silent force that filled the expansive room. The cello, she ventured, her voice a little breathy, hauntingly beautiful. He turned slowly, his eyes dark as midnight, meeting hers across the vast space. It is Tchaikovsky. Nocturne in D minor. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, yet there was a richness to it that resonated deep within her. You appreciate classical music, Miss Rodriguez? Life within Dante Volkov's sprawling estate had settled into a rhythm, an almost unnatural calm that both soothed and unnerved Clara. Her days were consumed by art, by the meticulous restoration of ancient canvases and delicate sculptures, a world of beauty that felt impossibly distant from the violence she knew lurked just beneath the surface of this man's empire. The fear for Leo, once a constant, gnawing pain, had softened into a gentle hum of relief, a fragile peace bought at an unquantifiable price. She spoke to her mother and Leo regularly now, always supervised, always brief, but their voices, full of a newfound hope, were a balm to her soul. Leo's laughter, stronger, clearer, was her most potent antidote to the insidious sense of being owned. Yet, despite the luxurious cage, the invisible bars never truly disappeared. Every glance from a silent guard, every unobtrusive detail of her monitored communications served as a constant reminder of her precarious position. She was a possession, valuable and protected, but a possession nonetheless. There was a quiet hum of tension that perpetually thrummed beneath the surface of her new reality, a micro-tension she carried in her shoulders, a faint tremor in her hands even when they were steadying a delicate brush. One frigid Tuesday morning, the first crack appeared in the pristine facade of her new life. Clara sat in her studio, sunlight streaming through the arched windows, illuminating the swirling dust motes and the vibrant pigments on her palette. She was applying a final varnish to a Byzantine icon, the scent of the resin sharp and sweet in the air. A discreet knock sounded at her door. It was Alara, Dante's impeccably dressed personal assistant, her face usually a mask of serene professionalism, now faintly creased with a subtle frown. "Miss Rodriguez," Alara began, her voice unusually subdued, "Mr. Volkov wishes to see you in his study." Immediately, the word immediately resonated with an icy chill. Clara's stomach clenched. She hadn't been summoned to his study since the night of her deal. Her mind instantly leaped to Leo, to her mother. Had something happened? Had Thorn found a way to hurt them? A wave of suffocating panic washed over her, chilling her to the bone. She wiped her hands on a rag, her movements jerky. "Is everything all right?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alara's expression remained unreadable. "Mr. Volkov will explain." Clara followed her, her footsteps echoing too loudly on the polished marble floors. The grand halls of the mansion, usually a source of quiet awe, now felt oppressive, their grandeur mocking her internal terror. The scent of Dante's cologne, which had begun to feel strangely comforting in its familiarity, now struck her as sharp, dangerous. The study, usually cloaked in a warm, scholarly atmosphere, felt colder, more austere. Dante stood by the massive fireplace, but there was no fire blazing. Only the faint, smoky scent of cold ashes. He held a small, cream-colored envelope, its edges crisp and unmarred. His face, usually a study in controlled impassivity, was etched with a subtle, dangerous tension. His eyes, fixed on the envelope, were colder than Clara had ever seen them. "You wish to see me, Mr. Volkov?" Clara asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. He looked up then, his gaze snapping to hers, and a shiver ran down her spine. There was an icy fury simmering beneath his composure, a barely contained storm. "Indeed, Clara." He used her first name, a rare occurrence, and it felt less like intimacy and more like a warning. "Do you recognize this?" He held out the envelope. Clara approached cautiously, her heart hammering. The envelope had no postage, no sender's address, just her name, handwritten in a scrawling, almost childlike script. A wave of nausea washed over her. She knew that handwriting. A forgotten nightmare resurfaced. It's from my old apartment building," Clara whispered, her eyes wide. "The manager, he sometimes left notes like this for overdue rent." Dante's jaw tightened. "And what does it contain?" With trembling fingers, Clara opened the envelope. Inside lay a single, neatly folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it. It wasn't a note from her old manager. It was a photograph. A recent one. A grainy, slightly blurred image of her mother, sitting on a park bench, her face tired but peaceful, holding Leo's hand. Leo was laughing, a bright, unburdened laugh. But in the background, lurking in the shadows of a tree, was a figure, tall and gaunt, partially obscured. Yet Clara recognized him instantly. The slicked back hair, the avaricious gleam in the visible eye. Or, Clara gasped, the photograph slipping from her numb fingers. It fluttered to the polished floor like a dying bird. "No," she breathed, the word a strangled sob. He was there. Near them, pure, unadulterated terror seized her, shaking her to the core. Thorn hadn't given up. He had found them. He had breached the sanctuary Dante had promised. Dante picked up the photograph, his gaze cold, assessing. Indeed, a rather crude attempt at intimidation. Sent directly to the estate's secondary entrance, disguised as an official document. A test, perhaps, to see if my defenses were as formidable as my reputation. Clara could only stare, a torrent of frantic thoughts rushing through her mind. Leo? Her innocent, fragile Leo. Thorn could touch them. He could hurt them. All of Dante's power, all of his promises, felt like dust in the face of this immediate, horrifying threat. You said they would be safe, she choked out, her voice cracking with fear and a burgeoning rage. Dante's eyes, usually so controlled, sparked with a dangerous, feral glint. And they are. This message never reached them. It reached me. And that, Clara, changes everything for Mr. Thorne. His voice was low, a predator's growl, promising inevitable retribution. He misunderstands the nature of my protection. It is not a suggestion. It is absolute. And the consequences for challenging it are terminal. He picked up a sleek black phone from his desk, his fingers moving with swift, practiced efficiency. He spoke a few words, quick and precise, in a language Clara didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Cold command, absolute authority. His voice was devoid of any emotion, yet it was more terrifying than any scream. She heard snippets, Thorne a location confirmed, eliminate. Clara froze, her blood turning to ice. Eliminate. The word hung in the air, a death knell. She knew with chilling certainty what it meant. Dante wasn't sending a warning. He was sending an executioner. He ended the call, his gaze returning to Clara, now a cold, piercing intensity that seemed to strip away her very soul. Consider this a lesson, Clara. My world is dangerous, but when I make a promise, it is kept. Thorne will not trouble your family again, or anyone else's. Clara stared at him, whirlwind of conflicting emotions tearing through her. Fear, profound and shaking, for the man Thorne was, for the fate that now awaited him. But beneath it, a strange, dark fascination. He was a monster, yes, a man who ordered death with the same nonchalance he might order a coffee. Yet, that monstrous power was now aimed at protecting her, safeguarding Leo. It was brutal, terrifyingly efficient. And in that terrifying efficiency, she felt a perverse, unsettling sense of security. He was terrifying, but he was her terrifying. Her protector. Her captor. She felt a shiver, a strange blend of revulsion and awe ripple through her. This was the true cost of her deal, the depth of the darkness she had stepped into. She was bound to a man who would kill without hesitation to uphold his word, to secure what was his. And she was undeniably his. What will happen to him? Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Dante simply looked at her, his obsidian eyes unreadable, yet radiating a power so absolute it stole her breath. He will simply disappear, as if he never existed. A shadow erased by a darker one. The finality of his words, the casual cruelty, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Thorne was gone, swiftly and brutally. And Clara, witness to this chilling display of power, realized that the world she had entered was far more deadly, far more absolute than she could have ever imagined. She was safe, yes, cocooned in this dark luxury. But the price of that safety was her soul, tethered to a man who moved mountains by crushing those who stood in his way. She was terrified, and utterly terrifyingly, under his complete control. The terrifying dance had truly begun. The quiet aftermath of Thorne's abrupt disappearance settled over the mansion like a fresh blanket of snow, pristine, beautiful, and concealing a chilling, unyielding darkness beneath. Clara walked through the opulent halls, her steps lighter, less burdened by the palpable threat that had dogged her every move. Leo's latest video call had shown a vibrancy she hadn't seen in months, his eyes sparkling, his laughter unrestrained. Dante had delivered on his promise, brutally and efficiently, and her family was truly safe. That truth was a powerful, intoxicating bomb. Yet a new kind of unease had begun to bloom within her. The sheer, chilling efficiency of Dante's justice had left her both terrified and undeniably awestruck. He was a force, an elemental power that bent the world to his will, erasing problems as if they had never existed. And she, Clara, was now intricately tethered to this force. The man who had ordered a life eradicated was also the man who had given her brother a future. This paradox gnawed at her, forcing her to look beyond the terrifying veneer of the Shadow Lord to search for the man beneath. Her studio became her refuge, but also her window into his soul. Dante rarely intruded, yet he began to leave her more challenging pieces to restore, often from his private, most guarded collection. These weren't the grand, celebrated works of the main gallery, but smaller, more intimate pieces, a chipped Roman bust with eyes that seemed to hold ancient sorrows, a faded icon depicting a weeping Madonna, a series of charcoal sketches, raw and visceral, portraying scenes of stark, desolate landscapes. Each piece felt like a deliberate offering, a silent invitation to glimpse a hidden part of him. One afternoon, Clara was painstakingly restoring a triptych of medieval miniatures, their colors muted by time and neglect. The central panel depicted a knight, armored and solitary, kneeling before a veiled, ethereal figure. She found herself drawn into the knight's melancholic gaze, a profound sadness emanating from the tiny, exquisite painting. The subtle scent of old parchment and beeswax filled her nostrils, a comforting anchor in her otherwise volatile world. The studio door opened, not with a knock, but with the familiar silent glide she had come to associate with Dante. Clara didn't startle this time. She merely continued her work, her pulse quickening, but her hands remaining steady. He entered, a tall, imposing shadow, and paused beside her easel. He didn't speak, merely observed the miniature, his gaze surprisingly gentle. "It speaks of loss, doesn't it?" Clara murmured, almost to herself, her voice barely a whisper. "The knight, he's lost something irreplaceable. A hope, a belief." Dante's breath hitched, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was the first time she had ever detected a crack in his unyielding composure. "Perhaps," he said, his voice unusually soft, devoid of its usual power, imbued instead with a melancholic resonance that startled her. "Or perhaps he seeks redemption for a loss he caused." Clara looked up, her eyes meeting his. For a fleeting moment, she saw something raw and unguarded in those dark depths, a flash of pain, of regret, quickly veiled. But it was there. A human vulnerability that sent a jolt through her. She had never considered Dante Volkov, the omnipotent Shadow Lord, as someone who could lose anything, let alone someone who could regret. "Do you believe in redemption, Mr. Volkov?" she asked, the words brave, perhaps foolish, but compelled by a sudden, aching curiosity. He turned from the painting, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, probing. "Belief is for the weak, Clara. I believe only in action. In consequences." He paused, then his eyes flickered back to the night. "But sometimes even the strongest actions cannot mend what has been truly broken." The air in the studio thickened, heavy with unspoken history. Clara felt a profound empathy stir within her. He was not merely a collector of art. He was a collector of broken things, perhaps, because he himself was broken. It was a dangerous thought, an emotional chink in the wall of fear and resentment she had built around him. Over the next few weeks, these subtle, almost silent interactions deepened. He would appear in her studio, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for an hour, simply observing her work, his presence the quiet hum in the background. He began to ask questions not about technique, but about the stories behind the art, the lives of the artists, the emotions they sought to capture. Clara, finding a safe space in their shared appreciation for beauty, opened up, speaking with a passion she rarely allowed herself to show outside her craft. She spoke of the delicate balance of preserving history, of the fragility of human creation, of how art could reflect both the greatest joys and the deepest sorrows. One evening, as she finished a particularly complex piece, an ancient scroll fragment with almost illegible script, Dante entered, a rare, almost hesitant look on his face. He held a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. "This," he said, his voice low, "belonged to my mother." Clara's heart skipped a beat. His mother. She knew almost nothing about his past, his origins, the forces that had shaped him into the man he was. He was an enigma, a formidable, self-made king of shadows. The mention of his mother, soft, intimate detail, was astonishing. He handed her the journal. It felt ancient, heavy with secrets. The pages were filled with delicate, elegant handwriting, interspersed with intricate botanical sketches. It was a journal of observations, of nature, of quiet beauty. Clara carefully turned a page, her fingers tracing the faded ink. She loved beauty, Dante continued, his gaze distant, lost in a memory. And silence. She saw the world differently. With a kindness I never fully understood. He paused, and Clara felt the weight of his unspoken words, the grief, the longing. She was taken from me when I was young, before I truly learned to protect her. The admission, raw and unbidden, hung in the air between them. It was a wound laid bare for her to see. Not a scar, but an open, aching wound. Clara looked from the journal to his face, and for the first time, she saw not the ruthless Mafia Boss, but a boy, forever haunted by loss, driven by a desperate, insatiable need to protect what was his. "I'm so sorry, Dante," she whispered, her voice thick with genuine empathy. She used his first name instinctively, and he didn't correct her. He nodded, a jerky, almost imperceptible movement. The world, it can be cruel to the unprotected, to the beautiful, to the kind. His eyes, dark and turbulent, met hers. You remind me of her sometimes. Not in appearance, but in spirit. Your passion, your resilience." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a strange, terrifying connection. He saw her, not just as a possession, not just as a tool, but as a person reflecting a cherished memory. It was a dangerous, intoxicating revelation. She had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to endure, but to have him see it, acknowledge it, was a different kind of validation. "Your mother would have been proud of your art, Clara," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble. "To bring beauty back from ruin is a powerful thing." He took the journal back, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second, sending a jolt through her. It was a touch that transcended their power dynamic, a spark of something fragile and intensely personal. The barrier between them, so rigid and formidable, had begun to crack, revealing the complex, wounded man beneath the Shadow Lord. Clara looked at him, her heart aching with a mixture of fear, fascination, and a burgeoning, terrifying tenderness. She was still his captive, but now she was beginning to see the man who held the key, and the possibility that his cage might hold a different kind of freedom than she had ever imagined. But in the shadowed corners of the mansion, a new danger stirred, unseen by Clara, meticulously observed by Dante. A report had landed on his desk that morning, detailing unusual movements in the city's criminal underbelly, a rival faction, ambitious and ruthless, making inquiries about the new acquisition of the Shadow Lord. A beautiful, vulnerable art restorer, now under his personal protection. A prize worth testing. And Dante, having just revealed a sliver of his soul, knew with chilling certainty that his greatest challenge, and Clara's greatest threat, was yet to come. The fragile piece Clara had found within Dante's formidable fortress was a dangerous, intoxicating illusion. Thorne's brutal erasure from existence had been a terrifying demonstration of Dante's absolute power, a chilling testament to his commitment to her and her family. Leo's laughter, brighter with each passing day, was the symphony of her fragile hope, a melody composed by the Shadow Lord's dark hand. She saw Dante now not just as her captor, but as a complex, wounded man, a protector whose darkness, paradoxically, offered a profound sense of security. She had allowed herself to lean into it, to trust the dangerous current that flowed between them, mistaking his possessiveness for a twisted, fierce devotion. Her days continued in the rhythm of art and quiet study, but her nights were often filled with a subtle, yearning restlessness. The brief, almost intimate moments in her studio, the shared appreciation for beauty, the fleeting glimpse into his own haunted past, these had woven a delicate, almost invisible thread between their souls. She was no longer just his acquisition. She was Clara, who saw the man beneath the monster, and he, she dared to hope, saw more than just a talented restorer in her. It was a terrifying, exhilarating tightrope walk between fear and a burgeoning, unwelcome attraction. But the world outside Dante's walls, the world he so meticulously controlled, was far more treacherous than the gilded cage she inhabited. His network of enemies was vast, ruthless, and ever watchful. An arrival, a ghost from his past whose ambition was as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, had been observing. Viktor Volkov, Dante's estranged cousin, a man whose cunning was matched only by his visceral hatred for the Shadow Lord, had seen Clara as more than just a weakness. He saw her as the perfect weapon. It began subtly. A rare collection of ancient Byzantine mosaics, discovered in a newly excavated site, required immediate, delicate stabilization. The site, Marcus explained, was too sensitive for a full team, requiring only the most skilled, discreet touch. Clara's expertise was unrivaled, her reputation even among her former peers, now carefully monitored and filtered, still whispered with. It was a unique, irresistible opportunity, a chance to touch history, to breathe life into something truly ancient and vulnerable. Her passion, the very core of her being, was being leveraged against her. Dante himself had seemed distant. He had given his reluctant approval, his obsidian eyes holding a flicker of something unreadable, but his words were clipped, almost curt. Marcus will accompany you. Every precaution will be taken. Do not deviate from the plan. His tone, devoid of the softening intimacy she had come to perceive, was a stark reminder of their true dynamic. He was the master, she, the obedient pawn. A sliver of unease had pricked her, but her professional integrity, her burning desire to save the art, had overridden it. The site was a desolate, cavernous warehouse in an industrial district on the city's outskirts, far removed from the opulent tranquility of Dante's estate. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp earth, concrete dust, and a faint, acrid tang of something metallic. A few ancient mosaics lay exposed, their vibrant colors muted by centuries of burial. Marcus, a silent, imposing shadow, stood guard at the entrance, his presence usually a comforting bulwark against the unknown. Today, however, Clara felt a strange, chilling isolation despite him. She knelt, her knees aching on the cold, unforgiving concrete, meticulously cleaning the delicate tesserae. Hours melted away, swallowed by the intensity of her focus. The outside world faded, replaced by the intricate patterns beneath her trembling fingers. The light, initially adequate, began to dim, casting long, distorted shadows across the vast space. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang echoed from the entrance. Clara startled, her head snapping up. Marcus, usually as unmovable as a stone gargoyle, was gone. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Marcus, she called out, her voice thin and reedy, swallowed by the vastness of the warehouse. Only silence answered, heavy, ominous silence that pressed down on her. A cold dread began to coil in her stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't how Dante operated. His protection was absolute, his security seamless. Yet she was utterly alone. Then a figure emerged from the deep shadows near the entrance. Not Marcus. A man tall and slender, with eyes that gleamed with cold amusement in the dim light. Viktor Volkov. His face, a pale, almost aristocratic replica of Dante's, was twisted into a smirk that sent a shiver of visceral revulsion through Clara. He held a small, silver-plated pistol, its muzzle glinting menacingly. "Ah, Miss Rodriguez," Victor purred, his voice a silken menace that grated on her nerves. "The Shadow Lord's little treasure." More artistic than I imagined. Clara scrambled backward, her hand scrabbling for a loose piece of debris. Who are you? Where is Marcus?" Victor chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Marcus is indisposed. He sends his regrets. As for me, I am the man who will remind my dear cousin, Dante, of the true cost of his arrogance. And you, my dear, are the currency." His words, so casual in their cruelty, shattered the last remnants of Clara's composure. Terror, cold and absolute, enveloped her. She wasn't safe. She had never been safe. She was merely a pawn, moved from one hand to another, from Thorne's manipulation to Dante's possession, and now to this new chilling threat. Dante, he'll find you, Clara spat, forcing the words out, a desperate, defiant bluff. Victor's smirk widened, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. Oh, he knows where you are, little bird. He knows exactly. He took a step closer, and another figure emerged from the shadows behind him, a large, brutish man, whose heavy footsteps echoed ominously. In fact, he was the one who so graciously led me to you. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. What are you talking about? Why, the dagger, of course, Victor said, circling her slowly, like a predator with its prey. The serpent's kiss. A magnificent piece. Dante knew I coveted it. He knew I would go to great lengths to acquire it. And he knew that to truly hurt me, I would have to be denied it, not through brute force, but through a clever little distraction. He gestured vaguely at her, his eyes twinkling with malicious glee. You? The talented restorer. The vulnerable orphan. The perfect bait. His words struck Clara like a physical blow, each one a poison dart. Bait. The truth, a grotesque, horrifying monster, began to unfurl in her mind. Dante's distant demeanor. The sensitive side. The seemingly easy approval. He hadn't been protecting her from Thorne, he had been using her. Using her as leverage, as a decoy, to secure his true prize, the mythical dagger, perhaps already resting in his vault. He had traded her knowingly to his enemy, all to protect his interest, his collection, his empire. The nascent trust she had nurtured, the fragile intimacy, the empathy for his own supposed wounds, it all crumbled into bitter ash. He had seen her vulnerability, her love for Leo, and had used it ruthlessly to orchestrate her betrayal. Despair, a profound, crushing weight, pressed down on her, stealing her breath. Her protector. Her rescuer. He had been the ultimate betrayer. The knowledge ripped through her, leaving her hollow and aching. She was nothing but a tool, a disposable piece in his ruthless game. The terror of Victor's presence paled in comparison to the searing agony of Dante's calculated treachery. She was utterly, irrevocably alone, abandoned in a cold, dusty warehouse, a sacrificial lamb offered up for a dagger. The brutish man seized her, his rough hand clamping over her mouth, muffling her desperate cry. Another tied her wrists, the coarse rope biting into her skin. Clara struggled, but her strength was pathetic against their combined force. Her eyes, wide with horror and a profound sense of abandonment, darted towards Victor, who watched her, his smirk triumphant. Don't worry, little bird, Victor purred, bending close, his voice a venomous whisper. My cousin will get his message. And you will serve a far more interesting purpose than just restoring dusty old art. You will be the very instrument of his downfall. He signaled to his brood. Take her, and ensure she understands the meaning of true despair. Clara felt a rough sack thrown over her head, plunging her into immediate, suffocating darkness. The last thing she saw, before the world disappeared, was a flicker of something in Victor's eyes, not just triumph, but a chilling promise of protracted suffering. She was being dragged away, a helpless commodity, into a black abyss, believing with every fiber of her being that the man she had begun to trust, the man who had claimed her, had sold her soul for his own dark designs. She was lost. Utterly, irrevocably, and devastatingly lost. The report landed on Dante Volkov's desk with a soft, ominous thud. Marcus, his face grim, stood opposite him, a silent sentinel of ill tidings. The precise, detached words of the reconnaissance team cut through the pristine air of Dante's study like shards of ice. Clara Rodriguez ambushed, taken by Victor Volkov. The details of the false lead, the abandoned warehouse, the deliberate lure, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Dante's carefully constructed defenses, his meticulously planned countermoves against Victor's long-simmering resentment, had been circumvented by a single, brutal truth. His cousin knew his weakness. Clara. For a terrifying, agonizing moment, the world narrowed to a single point of searing rage. Dante felt a primitive roar building in his chest, a savage, untamed beast awakening. He had guarded her, shielded her, claimed her as his own, and now she was gone. Taken. The word clawed at his insides, tearing at the carefully constructed control he had maintained his entire life. He had underestimated Victor, allowed a sliver of personal history to blind him, and now Clara was paying the price. The self-recrimination was a bitter, burning venom. His fury, usually a cold, precise instrument, now became an uncontrollable conflagration. The antique Venetian glass paperweight on his desk shattered under the sudden clench of his fist, shards glittering like forgotten tears. Marcus didn't flinch. He knew this rage, had seen its devastating power before. Every resource, Dante's voice was a low, dangerous growl, barely audible, yet vibrating with an unholy intensity. Every contact, every shadow. Find her. Now. The mansion, usually a place of quiet efficiency, erupted into a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Orders barked, phones rang off their hooks, encrypted data streamed across multiple screens. His network, a vast, intricate web woven from years of power and intimidation, stretched across the city, tearing through every dark corner, every hidden alley. No stone was left unturned. No informant uninterrogated. The sheer scale of his mobilization was terrifying, a full-blown military operation spearheaded by one man's desperate, possessive love. Meanwhile, Clara drifted in a terrifying haze. The rough sack over her head smelled of dust and fear, its darkness absolute. Her wrists ached, raw and chafed from ropes. She was cold, so cold, the chill seeping into her bones. The only sounds were the muffled thud of footsteps, the occasional gruff whisper, and the relentless pounding of her own despairing heart. She was in a deep, isolated dungeon somewhere, or perhaps a forgotten cellar. She had lost all sense of time, adrift in a sea of betrayal. Don, the man she had begun to trust, to admire, had traded her. The thought was a searing brand on her soul, far more painful than any physical discomfort. He was a monster, after all, and she, a fool, had allowed herself to forget. But Victor's words echoed, a constant, cruel refrain. Suddenly, the suffocating sack was ripped from her head. Clara blinked, eyes watering against the sudden, harsh glare of a single, bare bulb. She was in a derelict basement, concrete walls streaked with grime, pipes dripping somewhere above. Victor stood before her, his cruel smile illuminated by the weak light. Beside him, his brutish henchman, whose name she didn't know, held a glinting knife. The air was thick with a metallic tang of fear and something else, something faintly acrid, like burnt circuitry. Cousin Dante sends his regards. Victor sneered, his eyes dancing with malicious pleasure. Or rather, he will when he sees the message I'm sending him. You, my dear Clara, are about to become a very public, very painful example of his failures. He gestured to the brutish man. Start with the fingers. A restorer needs her tools, doesn't she? Clara gasped, raw, terrified sound. Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. She struggled against her restraints, a desperate, futile thrashing. This was it. Then. She would be mutilated, then discarded. Just as the hulking figure advanced, the heavy steel door to the basement exploded inward with a deafening crash. Splinters of metal and concrete flew through the air like shrapnel. The silhouette, impossibly broad and radiating pure, unadulterated fury, filled the gaping doorway. Don. He was a force of nature unleashed, a dark avenging angel. His eyes, burning with a primal savage intensity, instantly locked onto Clara, then on Victor. The look on his face was one she had never seen, a terrifying blend of absolute rage and desperate relief, a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Victor, Dante's voice, a guttural snarl, echoed through the shattered room. You made a grave mistake. You touched what is mine. Victor's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. Dante, you actually came for this, Pawn. I thought you'd be more concerned with your precious dagger. Dante didn't answer. He moved. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was almost inhuman. The brutish henchman, caught off guard, barely had time to react before Dante was upon him, a blur of controlled violence. A swift, brutal strike to the throat, a sickening crunch, and the man crumpled, lifeless, to the ground. The knife clattered uselessly beside him. Victor, his face pale, tried to raise his pistol. But Dante was already there, a dark phantom. He moved with a savage grace, disarming his cousin with a sickening twist of the wrist. Victor cried out, a pathetic, high-pitched yelp of pain. Dante's hand clamped around Victor's throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground, pinning him against the concrete wall. "You thought to use her," Dante hissed, his voice a low, murderous rasp. "You thought to break me through her." His grip tightened, Victor's face turning purple. "You will regret every breath you took in this life, cousin." Suddenly, from the shadows in the hallway, a hidden guard of Victor's opened fire. The deafening roar of a shotgun blast ripped through the air. Dante instinctively twisted, shielding Clara with his body. He grunted, a sharp, involuntary sound, as a searing pain erupted in his left shoulder. Blood bloomed swiftly on his dark shirt, stark against the fabric. Clara screamed, a piercing sound of pure terror. "He's hurt. For me." The realization shattered her belief in his betrayal, replacing it with a fresh wave of panic and a profound, agonizing guilt. He hadn't abandoned her. He had come, and he was willing to die for her. The other guards of Dante's elite force, who had stormed the building seconds after him, swarmed in, guns blazing. The basement became a chaotic ballet of violence, but Dante, despite his injury, never released Victor. His focus was absolute, his rage unyielding. He looked at Clara, his dark eyes fierce, possessive, despite the blood now staining his shoulder. "Clara," he commanded, his voice raw with effort. "Are you hurt?" "And no," she stammered, tears streaming down her face, the rope suddenly feeling inconsequential. "But you're bleeding." He ignored his wound, his gaze burning into hers. The relief that flooded her, seeing him there, alive, fighting for her, was overwhelming, almost paralyzing. The fear that he would be taken from her again, perhaps forever, was a sharper agony than anything Victor could have inflicted. With a final, sickening crunch, Dante tightened his grip on Victor's throat. A sickening crack echoed in the room. Victor's eyes rolled back, his body going limp. Dante dropped him, discarded ragdoll. He looked at the dead man, his expression utterly devoid of remorse. "Justice. Serve." He turned, his eyes fixed on Clara, the raging fire now softening into a desperate, possessive warmth. He moved towards her, his movements a little stiff, a testament to his injury, but his gaze never wavering. He cut her bonds, his fingers gentle against her chafed wrists. Clara launched herself into his arms, clinging to him, burying her face against his chest. She could feel the hard, muscled warmth of his body, the faint tremor of adrenaline, the hot stickiness of his blood. The scent of him, of danger and protection, filled her senses. It was messy, terrifying, and utterly, achingly real. She sobbed, a profound mix of terror and relief. He held her fiercely, his uninjured arm wrapped around her, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair. "Mine," he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw with a triumphant, possessive love. "Always, always mine." The battle raged above, but in that moment, cocooned in his powerful embrace, Clara felt a primal understanding bloom within her. He was a monster, a king of shadows, stained with blood and darkness. But he was her monster. And in his terrifying absolute possession, she found a strange, undeniable truth. She had never felt so utterly, completely safe. The world had tried to break her, to use her, but Dante had claimed her. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly protected, belonging to a darkness that would never let her go. The world, when it slowly re-emerged, was a kaleidoscope of pain and muted, luxurious comfort. Clara's body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, her wrists raw and chafed, a constant, stinging reminder of the ropes that had bound her. Yet she was safe. Cocooned in the silken sheets of her own bed in Dante's mansion, the air still sweet and faintly sterile. The chaos of the warehouse, the brutal violence, Victor's cruel smirk, Dante's savage fury, it all played on an endless loop behind her eyelids, a terrifying visceral nightmare from which she had barely escaped. She woke to the soft murmur of hushed voices outside her door, the faint clinking of glass, the scent of antiseptic. Her eyes fluttered open to the soft glow of a bedside lamp, casting warm shadows across the unfamiliar ceiling. A doctor, precise and efficient, checked her vitals, murmuring reassurances. She was bruised, dehydrated, suffering from shock, but physically, miraculously unharmed. The greatest wounds were not visible on her skin. They were etched deep into her psyche. Then he was there. Donna. He moved like a silent shadow into her room, his presence immediately filling the space, shifting the air itself. His left arm was in a sling, his jaw tight, a faint bruise blooming under his eye. He was wounded, yes, but radiated an even more potent, controlled danger than usual. He dismissed the doctor with a curt nod, his gaze never leaving Clara's face. She stared at him, tears welling in her eyes, complex torrent of emotions overwhelming her. Relief, so profound it made her physically weak. Guilt, searing and immediate, for having doubted him, for having believed the monstrous lie of his betrayal. And a terrifying, aching tenderness for the man who had walked through hell to claim her, who had taken a bullet for her. He approached the bed slowly, his dark eyes searching hers. There was no triumph in his gaze, no arrogance, only a raw, almost desperate concern that stunned her. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a tremor through her, a startling tenderness from a man capable of such brutal force. Clara, his voice was a low, raspy murmur, raw with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Are you truly all right? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her gaze fixed on his injured arm, the sling a stark reminder of his sacrifice. You were hurt, she whispered, her voice cracking. Because of me. His eyes darkened, a dangerous gleam flickering within their depths. It means nothing. A scratch. He dismissed it with a wave of his uninjured hand. What matters is that you are safe. That he did not touch you. The possessiveness in his voice was absolute, unwavering, a fierce declaration. He sat on the edge of her bed, the sheer weight of his presence both comforting and intimidating. He didn't say anything more for a long moment, simply watched her, his gaze intense, assessing. Clara felt a strange, profound understanding bloom within her. This wasn't just about ownership anymore. This was about something deeper, something primal. He hadn't rescued her out of obligation. He had rescued her out of a terrifying, absolute devotion. Over the next few days, Dante's presence was a constant, quiet balm. He didn't hover, but he was always there. Marcus or Alara brought her nourishing, delicious meals, but Dante himself would often deliver her afternoon tea, a delicate blend of herbs designed to calm. He would sit by her window, looking out at the gardens, saying little, but his presence was a powerful anchor, silently reassuring her that the world outside his walls could not reach her. Clara watched him, fascinated. As he worked remotely from her sitting room, his phone calls hushed, his commands clipped and precise. She saw the other side of the Shadow Lord, the strategist, the architect of his empire. The faint whispers of conversations, the snippets of news Alara occasionally mentioned, painted a grim picture of Viktor Volkov's network being systematically dismantled. His assets seized, his contacts disappearing, his name becoming a cursed echo in the underworld. Dante wasn't just punishing Victor's audacity. He was sending a devastating, unequivocal message to anyone who dared to challenge his authority, or more importantly, to harm what was his. One evening, as the twilight painted the sky in hues of deep violet and bruised orange, Clara found the courage to ask, "What about Thorn?" Dante, who had been absently tracing the rim of his teacup, looked up, his eyes cold and unyielding. Thorn, he enunciated the name with a chilling contempt, is experiencing a far more prolonged and agonizing form of consequence. He paused, a ghost of a predatory smile playing on his lips. His entire network of shell companies, his illicit art dealings, his hidden accounts, all have been systematically exposed. Not by me directly, but by anonymous sources. His legitimate businesses are failing, his partners abandoning him. The authorities conveniently have found mountains of irrefutable evidence implicating him in embezzlement, fraud, and a host of other charming activities. He is facing decades in prison, stripped of every penny, every shred of reputation. Clara listened, a shiver running down her spine. It was a punishment far more insidious, more drawn out than outright violence. Thorne would watch his life unravel, piece by agonizing piece, knowing exactly who was pulling the strings from the shadows. It was a dark justice, precise and utterly merciless. And a part of Clara, the part that remembered the humiliation, the fear for Leo, felt a profound, vengeful satisfaction. "No one crosses me, Clara," Dante said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, his eyes fixed on hers. "No one harms what I claim," and walks away intact. In that moment, Clara understood the true, terrifying depth of his protection and the unbreakable nature of the bond she now shared with him. It wasn't just physical safety. It was an absolute claim, a fierce, almost terrifying devotion. She was forever entangled in his world of shadows and power, a world where he ruled supreme, a world where she was both his most prized possession and his most guarded weakness. There was no escaping it. And to her own astonishment, she found that she no longer wanted to. The terror had transmuted into a strange, fierce belonging. She was healed, yes, but forged anew in the crucible of his dark justice, bound to him by threads of fear, gratitude, and a dangerous, undeniable love. Her life, utterly transformed, now awaited its final absolute claim. Isn't it true that sometimes the deepest scars hide the fiercest battles, and the most unexpected love emerges from absolute ruin? Clara's journey from public humiliation and profound betrayal to the fierce, dark protection of her shadow lord reminds us your past wounds don't define your true worth. Her story proves that even when the world tries to break you, a love can rise from the shadows, claiming you completely, not to diminish, but to elevate and heal every fractured piece of your soul. If this resonated, if it ignited hope for the protection and belonging you deserve, join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, "I am claimed by love." Let's find light in the shadows together.